Welcome to The Mushroom Show, the one place where you need to be if you want to stay on top of all the cool things happening in the world of mushrooms. My name is Tony Shields, this is episode 37, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about one of the oldest potential use cases for psilocybin that you might not have ever heard of before. We're also going to be talking about a global mushroom hunting event that doesn't even involve any actual mushrooms. It's called Game of Shrooms, and we'll be going over everything you need to know, including an interview with the artist behind it all, Daniel Attaboy Seifert. So if you like mushrooms, if you like The Mushroom Show, please go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to see future episodes of the show, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well. Let's jump into the show. We talk a lot about psilocybin and mental health because there is an explosion of research going on that is completely reframing the narrative and setting up an exciting future for these very special mushrooms. But the potential for psilocybin goes beyond mental health. I saw new research pop up recently and thought it was a good chance to bring up the story of cluster headaches and psilocybin as a potential intervention. Now, even though the research that I saw was new, the potential for psilocybin to be used for cluster headaches is not a new concept and has been around for almost 25 years already. But first of all, what are cluster headaches? A lot of people think that they're just some sort of really bad headache or maybe something similar to a migraine, but that does not do enough to describe what a cluster headache is. I have never experienced one, luckily, but apparently they are an excruciating type of headache that is characterized by a super intense unilateral pain, often but not always around the eye, with onsets of attacks occurring in clusters from weeks to months, followed by remission periods. Not to diminish migraines, which luckily I haven't experienced either, but people with migraines will often deal with them by simply kind of dimming the lights, maybe going to a quiet room, and just kind of waiting until it passes. Whereas people with cluster headaches are experiencing a whole new level of pain, unable to sit still, squirming around in anguish, and unable to think of anything else except the immediate pain. In fact, many sources list cluster headaches specifically as one of the single most painful medical conditions that a human can experience. One user on Reddit talking about the comparison between cluster headaches and migraines explained it like this. Some migraine sufferers are confused with clusters. Clusters are an altogether different entity. There's no turning down the lights. There's no lying down to let it pass. There's fire and agony personified, pinpoint unleashed on your brain with laser precision. We bang our heads into concrete. We hurt ourselves in other ways to try and confuse the pain signals to the brain. Anything to distract ourselves for a moment. I was a D1 wrestler in college. I have an incredible tolerance for pain. My clusters leave me in a fetal shell of myself, begging for some respite. It honestly sounds awful, which is why people who suffer from this condition are looking for anything that might help. And luckily there are some medications available that some people have found to work. People have described them as life-changing or sometimes even life-saving. Previous forms of treatment have also included invasive surgeries, such as deep brain stimulation, microvascular decompression, and less intrusive but still serious gamma knife radiation. But other people who didn't have any luck with these medications and didn't want to try some of these invasive surgeries have apparently turned to psilocybin mushrooms. This may sound surprising, but when you look into some of the reasons why and some of the science behind it, it might not be as crazy as you think. The ground zero for this idea is an organization called Cluster Busters, which is a non-profit created by Bob Wold in 2002, dedicated to supporting research, better treatments, and a cure for cluster headaches while advocating to improve the lives of those struggling with the condition. It was originally started as a way to get psilocybin and other things similar to it, like LSD, prescribed for this condition, or at least get some research started around it. And much of the focus for the organization is around psilocybin as a potential treatment, including the struggle to be able to do so within the legal framework currently surrounding the substance. It all started way back in 1998 when somebody made a post on a message board. And if you're too young to know what a message board is, kind of imagine it like Reddit, but just for a specific topic. But this person who suffered from cluster headaches was explaining their own anecdotal experience with LSD and how an experience with LSD was able to break the cycle of their cluster headaches. Now, a lot of people just wanted to write this idea off as another miracle cure that didn't actually work, except for the fact that there's some real scientific basis behind what the user was experiencing. That is because LSD contains an indole ring, which is a chemical structure with two carbon rings where one or more of the hydrogens has been replaced by another group. Here's what LSD looks like, for example, and here is what psilocybin looks, for example. You can see there's similarities. They both have indole rings. The reason why this is interesting is because there is another endogenous compound that also contains an indole ring and looks similar to both of these compounds. That compound is serotonin. Serotonin and cluster headaches are thought to be related, even though researchers do not really know exactly what causes them. But the thinking is that these indole compounds, such as psilocybin, could act on the same pathways that might be causing the headache, so perhaps it's logical that the compounds could have a positive effect. For example, by stimulating these serotonin receptors, psilocybin could modulate neurotransmitter release in a way that might interrupt the cycle of cluster headaches, potentially resetting a part of the brain that starts the cluster headache in the first place. But why would it work after the acute effects of psilocybin have worn off, which is usually only a couple of hours? That is a much more interesting question to answer, and according to Bob Wold, again, who is the founder of Clusterbusters, one of the theories that is going around is this idea of epigenetics. The idea that psilocybin could affect the way that certain genes express themselves without affecting the underlying DNA. In one of his presentations, he postulates that it's actually changing the ways that genes express themselves. It's actually trying to reset the brain, basically resetting the brain to not misfire and create cluster headaches. So back to the origin story of this idea, after the initial post on this message board, other people started chiming in, other people started experimenting specifically with psilocybin and achieving really good results. This led to the creation of Clusterbusters, which eventually led to broader interest from the medical research community. The first paper published on this topic was published in 2006 in the Journal of Neurology, titled Response of Cluster Headache to Psilocybin and LSD, which wasn't a clinical trial, but instead involved interviews with 53 cluster headache sufferers who had used psilocybin or LSD to try and treat their condition. And although admittedly the results are all anecdotal and the respondents might be self-selecting for having success with this treatment, the results were still pretty astounding. Now again, this is anecdotal and possibly self-selected, which the researchers admit was a limitation. Also, it's kind of hard to tell, especially when using it as a preventative or as a remission tool, whether or not it was specifically the psilocybin that was helping with the treatment or if it was something else entirely. And further research was done over the years. There was one study published in November 2022 titled Exploratory Investigation of a Patient-Informed Low-Dose Psilocybin Pulse Regimen in the Suppression of Cluster Headache, Results from a Randomized Double-Blind Placebo-Controlled Trial, where they wanted to see if the method patients were reporting was having an effect when compared to placebo using the so-called pulse regime, which is taking psilocybin in a pulse of 3 doses each 5 days apart. The results of this specific study did show a reduction in attack frequency, but was deemed to be not statistically significant, in part, the researchers claimed, because of a low amount of participants, which was only 16. But the researchers did do a follow-up study, a recently published blinded extension phase, to repeat this same regime, and the results were encouraging. They found that 3 weeks after the start of the pulse, cluster attack frequency was significantly reduced from baseline, and that a reduction of approximately 50% was seen regardless of individual response to psilocybin in the first round. Psilocybin was well tolerated without any unexpected or serious adverse events, which is another encouraging sign that something like this might eventually make its way out into the world as a potential treatment for one of the most painful conditions known to man. And it does make you think that this might have some implications for other types of pain, for migraines, for example, or for other types of nerve pain. Again, this idea that psilocybin might be potentially beneficial for mental health has really taken over the conversation, but it turns out this confounding molecule might have much broader implications in terms of cluster headaches and who knows what else. It'll be really interesting to see where this goes. On to our next story. Now, everybody loves scavenger hunts. Kids, of course, love them, but I think secretly lots of adults love a good scavenger hunt as well. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons why people love mushroom hunting or foraging so much, because you kind of head out into the woods, you never really know what you're going to find, and it does kind of feel like a mad scavenger hunt. I sometimes like to think of it as like a real-life game of Pokemon or something along those lines. But mushroom hunting is not for everybody. You got to get out of the city, you're out into the elements, into the mud, into the rain, you're fighting mosquitoes, you're fighting flies and bugs, and it can be quite the adventure. And furthermore, a lot of people aren't that comfortable identifying mushrooms, so even if they do find them, maybe there's not that much they can do with them other than maybe take a picture. But what if you could join a worldwide scavenger hunt where instead of hunting for mushrooms, you're hunting for mushroom-themed art? Well, believe it or not, this kind of event actually exists. It's called Game of Shrooms, and in my opinion is one of the coolest things happening in the mushroom community. Here's how it works. Artists from all over the world create all sorts of mushroom themed art. This can be anything really, like medallions or jewelry or knitted things or paintings or sculptures, really anything as long as it's actually just original art. Then on game day, which this year is Saturday, June 8th, these artists will take their creations and go hide them in public places. They will also leave hints as to where these are hidden on their social media, which seems to be mostly focused around Instagram. Anyone that wants to participate can check out what's going on in their area by checking out the map. They can then follow these artists on social media, pick up some of the clues, and then go out and try to find and keep the art. Artists might get more exposure in their local community. People also get to go out and find these cool pieces of art that they can treasure for a lifetime. People celebrate mushrooms in the meantime, and overall, it's really a win-win. Now, one of the things that really blew me away when I first learned about Game of Shrooms a couple years ago was how big this event really is. Take a look at this map, for example. This is the 2024 map, so I imagine there are still plenty of pins to be added, but even so, just look at this. There are locations all over the world. Zooming into the US, you can see that if you're anywhere near a major center, there's very likely something you can go find on game day. Now, I just love this kind of thing, because just like how mushrooms grow, Game of Shrooms is something that really started out small, but organically has spread its spores and really taken on a life of its own. To get a better idea of what Game of Shrooms is all about, I had the chance to sit down with the founder, the creator, or as he likes to call himself, the parent of Game of Shrooms, Daniel Attaboy Seifert. Let's jump into the conversation. So, Atta, thank you so much for joining us today on The Mushroom Show.
Happy to be here. Totally.
Yeah, really excited to chat with you. Now, first of all, why don't you just give us maybe a brief background, a little bit about yourself and your background as an artist?
I'm an artist and former toy designer in recovery, probably. And I do co-founded High Fructose Magazine with my wife, Annie Owens, who's also an artist. About almost 20 years ago. And I work in all sorts of medium, including upcycled materials to paint, to sculptures, to strange events, I guess. That's part of the art form now. And I started Game of Shrooms I started hiding mushrooms or original artworks that in the form of mushrooms in 2016 when I was in the middle of a pretty bad depression. In hindsight, and it kind of changed the narrative of my day so that I can kind of control at least one part of my day to make it positive. I think in hindsight, that's what was going on.
Yeah, and I love to get into the genesis of Game of Shrooms, how it came to be. And I think a lot of our viewers might be vaguely familiar with what Game of Shrooms is. I know I've definitely talked about it before, but I'd love to hear in your own words, why don't you tell us, what is Game of Shrooms? How do you explain it to somebody?
I avoid the word scavenger hunt because it doesn't feel like a scavenger hunt. It's to me, and the words have kind of evolved over time, but to me, it's an art and seek event. It's a leave no trace art and seek event where on one day nature invades the human space in the form of original art creations that you can find, and if you luckily find them, you can keep them. And so it's artists participate all over the world. Including last year was Antarctica as well. So it's kind of grown to a wonderful. It's evolved into a wonderfully beautiful monster.
Yeah, no, it's so cool to see how it's grown, and I like to think of it. You said you don't like to think of it as a scavenger hunt, but in a way, it's almost kind of like the way, like when I go into the woods to look for real mushrooms, it kind of has that same feeling. It's almost like finding like Pokemon or something, or it is a bit of a hunt, and you never really know what you're going to find. And I love that you've brought this idea kind of globally, and people are able to search not only for mushrooms but mushroom themed art, obviously. But you talked a little bit about what inspired you to start it. It sounds like it's something that kind of started organically as just something that you were doing and kind of naturally evolved. So let's go into the genesis of that idea a little bit. How did it begin?
So you say organically, all my puns are intended, so yes, it was definitely organically. I started hiding these paintings of mushrooms. My grandmother had a whole house full of mushrooms and had a ceramic studio filled with mushroom type things. So possibly that was part of it, of why I started doing it. I lost her and my brother, my grandfather, my dad. I mean, there's very few people on my side of the family left. And I started hiding these things and people started finding them, and it was wonderful. Originally, I thought it was going to be a point system kind of thing, almost like the artist Invader does with his kind of bitmap looking Space Invader type things. possibly that's probably where that came from. But it ended up, no, the art itself was the reward itself, and it was a one of a kind creation. So people started doing it. Then I heard of other artists starting to do it, and I started getting a little defensive about it. And I like as you do when you start doing something and other people start doing it. And I said, no, wait a minute. This thing is bringing me some happiness and some levity and changing my perspective on things and bringing joy to other people. It seems that we should not stop that. Never be in the way of joy if you can possibly help it, right? At least, but it's funny how we work that way as creators and things. So I said, you know what? Okay, how about we do it all in one day and we do it all at the same time? And so I invited about 50 different artists. Half of them were artists that we've dealt with in the magazine before. And then other people said, well, can I do it? And I said, well, one secret is I can't have you not do it,
Right.
But I said, sure, you can. Yes, you are officially ordained as a mushroom maker and hunter, whatever, as if I could control them in Nebraska. So anyhow, I said, okay, well, let's do that. And then so people started doing it. And then we all hide it on a day that's coincidentally right around my birthday. So it's kind of not a lot of people know that part of it, but it's kind of like the ultimate birthday present to myself. Like, what would I ever want to do is have people do something ridiculous out of the ordinary, something that makes them look at their literally around their neighborhood, their backyard, and their near vicinity in a different way, which I've always been into. Or at least now looking back, I go, oh, I love that. Like, Andy Warhol's Campbell soup cans. You might not be a fan of the paintings or Andy Warhol as a persona or as an artist, but you'll never look at a Campbell soup can the same way again. And I love that. Things that we take for granted that we look at in a new way. And that seems to kind of go with a mushroom theme or people who take psilocybin or go on trips and things like that. I've never done any of that stuff, by the way. I've never had a beer. I've never had any sort of anything. I would have been probably a lot healthier if I did. I have a very addictive personality, and I know that, and that's infused in most things that I do. But so I see that where, if we can look at things that we normally take for granted in a different way, maybe that can bring us some happiness, and using your available resources is something I'm really into, and kind of the elements of kind of punk rock or DIY or whatever have you that I love. That's the spirit of things I'm really drawn to.
That is really interesting. I love this idea of mushrooms, helping you see something from a different perspective. Of course, that makes sense in in psilocybin mushrooms and the psychedelic side of things, but it also makes sense just in mushrooms that grow in the woods. I know like lots of people might walk through the woods and not think twice about them, but once you start learning about them and learning how they're kind of interconnected in nature, and they'll start to appear everywhere, and you see the whole world really from a different perspective, which I think is kind of cool. Now, you mentioned growing up, you saw maybe a lot of mushroom themed art. I think you mentioned at your grandmother's house, but was there anything else specifically about the mushrooms? Like, why wasn't it, any other type of art that you started hiding around the city? What was it about the mushrooms specifically that kind of attracted you?
Yeah, I think it taps into the theme of death and rebirth and that sort of thing, but also they pop up unexpectedly. So you're literally metaphorically looking down and you find a surprise, and that idea. So that idea is like look up, look down, finders keepers. Those are all kinds of things that I see with mushrooms, and also this activity of more of like I call it an art and seek kind of thing. So I think that feeds into it. Also, honestly, it's the easiest thing to paint or draw. You can't mess up. There's times where I was just doing weird shapes, and the variety of mushrooms and fungus and all sorts of things like that. I mean, these are really, some say they're little visitations from alien spacedom, right? That come in and visit and might be responsible to our consciousness, for our consciousness or subconsciousness or our interconnectivity or our, and I'm starting to believe, think that's more of a possibility more and more. So although I don't partake in those things, I really kind of, I'm really interested in that, those sorts of things,
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that one. Like, not only do we know so little about everything, but mushrooms seems to be specifically something that generally as a society we know very little about. Obviously, we're learning more, but the whole kingdom fungi is kind of undiscovered. You could very likely go for a walk and find a species of mushrooms that nobody has ever discovered before, just because there's millions more species that have never been discovered than those that have, and the mysteries just keep unfolding. And I like that idea that you talk about, that mushrooms almost kind of have this consciousness and they're making themselves more and more present in our world. And believe it or not, like Game of Shrooms is a part of that, because it's kind of turned into a bit of a global phenomenon. It seems to be getting bigger and bigger every year. And I wanted to know, is this something that kind of took a concerted effort to grow? Or is it something that just kind of took on a life of its own once you started it?
It has a life of its own. Somebody recently called me the parent of Game of Shrooms, and I like that better than creator or founder or things like that, because
Okay.
really what I'm doing is guiding it, but it's become its own thing, just like a child has become its own person. So I kind of look at it that way, and I look at it as I don't own it. Almost like, so I'm just steering it. It's definitely something that's evolved. My wife and I have figured out, she's an avid hiker, and she says, if I went out into the woods and I was in there for 10 miles deep and I see a piece of art or whatever that was from your event from 6 months ago, I think I'm going to get a little perturbed over it. And and she has right to be so. So the idea of like nature invading the human space, that phrase alone took maybe 2 years to figure out. So
Mm.
on that day, nature invades our human space. So little things like that. So to create rules that aren't rules but are part of the spirit of the game is more powerful than it is just to put a list of rules of what to do, what not to do. Because originally we're like, well, don't hide things in parks, and what we're really trying is to say is like, don't trample through things. Don't be respectful, and that you don't need to be destructive to be subversive either. So it's that spirit, and that's something I got also from these people called the Cacophony Society in San Francisco. One of the reasons I moved to this area, where they would change billboards and billboard messages, but they would never harm the billboard. They'd make it so that things could be removed, and that the workers who came to fix the things that they altered would easily remove things, and they would give them instructions on how to remove them and how to fix them, and they would leave malt liquor for them as well as a prize.
Okay.
So that kind of thing, that kind of street art, that kind of subversiveness that takes a little more forethought is something I'm really interested in, because it changes the way people think about what they can do. It gives them permission to be creative. They also, this game, they learn about artists in their sometimes in their backyard, hopefully not in their direct backyard without them knowing, but sometimes it happens. But they learn about artists that they didn't know existed.
Yeah.
And this, we're talking people in Omaha and people in Peru and things like that. So people make connections in that way, and some of them become real art fans, and not only that, collectors of the artists.
Hmm.
So to see that happen, as well as like local press covering not me, not the event, but covering these local artists and them playing. And when they say things like it's leave no trace, or it's some of these things we say, it's art and seek, or it's invasion of the human space, that kind of a thing, it makes me very happy, because it's grown in an organic way, that because this thing could go so big that all the businesses and everybody, they're going to start putting in like rewards and coupons and prizes and stuff.
Hmm.
This has nothing to do with brand building, and I try to tell people that.
Hmm.
And I'm sure, yeah. So if that makes any sense.
That makes a ton of sense. And I think, first of all, I want to pick up on the point that you said, it exposes people to artists they might not have heard of before. And I experienced this myself, right? When I first heard about Game of Shrooms, I was like, well, I'll check out the map. There's probably nobody in Edmonton, where I'm from, but,
Hmm.
I'll see if there's anything there. And there was like a dozen pins. And I was like, what? Like, it was really surprising that not only there were so many artists, but so many artists that knew about this event and were participating in it. And it was pretty cool to see. And like, not only was there lots of people creating art and hiding it, there was lots of people going to find it, because I went out early. I had a game plan, but I got skunked. Like, everybody found something before I did. So I was like, wow, a lot of people are, enjoying this as well.
Yeah, the artist can also a lot of them hunt for other people's art as well. So it's you have to have a game plan with these things. Around here, everybody gets a little paranoid that day, because when you go to find a perfect space to hide something, you're looking around and other people are looking around and you're like, what's going on today? And I love that it's non-denominational, non-religious, doesn't cost any money. It's non-commercial. There's no guilt. There's no like feeling of like this FOMO thing isn't there as much, or this left outness that you feel at like even St. Patty's Day or on something like Valentine's Day. There's nothing like that. Like the night before, my family and I will continue to make another piece together or something like that. And then the next day we go out. I pretty much turn off my phone that day. So people think I'm out definitely, trying to promote it for other people who are in, I call them pioneers, people in suburban areas, especially like I grew up in a real rural suburbs. So I know it's harder for them to play weird games like this than other people. So I try to get them out as much as I can instead of like the people in Los Angeles and Portland. Like they're fine. They're covered. They're going to get a whole audience. Those places are epicenters for this kind of stuff. So on that day though, I'll turn off my phone and I'll just enjoy the moment, and I'll be hiding the things, and I'll just do that and spend time with my family and stuff. And little kids play, groups of people play. It's a holiday more than it is a scavenger hunt, I think.
Yeah, and you mentioned turning off your phone, but I mean, I guess like the social media aspect of it is a pretty important part, right? Because people are leaving clues throughout the day, and that's part of what I
Mm-hmm.
find fun about it as well, because you can find out about these artists, and then you can follow what they're doing
Yes.
over time. So, was that kind of intended too to have social media play such an important role in this? I guess, or I guess there's no other way around it, but is that something that just evolved naturally as well?
No, it wasn't. It was just the only way I thought people might find my work. But then the other thing is there's some people so each pin on the map represents a participating artist who might be hiding maybe up to 10 pieces. So you don't know that. And so the amount of art is so that's just an artist. It's not a location of an actual piece of art.
Right.
Because so they also might be sending work to friends in other states who are hiding things on their behalf. And that happens a lot. Some people aren't on the map at all. And what's interesting about it is a lot of people also will find they're just, whether civilians, we'll call them or whatever, they don't know the game yet. They discover the game
Uh,
and they didn't know they were playing. So they find it and they're like, what is this? And then they get the sense of wonder and mystery and they're like, what's going on here? What I can keep this? What is this special? Because they're original pieces of work. They're not
mhm.
printouts. They're not signs or coupons or even stickers.
Mhm.
I ask people not to do those kinds of things. Like for one day, take a break from all the pimping of all your brand, and make something special, something that means something to you, and take a risk and put it out in the world. So
Mhm.
when they do that, then the next year they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna play. I'm gonna make something, or I'm gonna," now they're tuned in. So it usually takes 2 years, it seems, for people to get really, really involved. Because they might not discover it until 5 p.m. on game day.
Yeah, that'd be a pretty cool thing just to randomly find a piece of
Mhm.
mushroom art
It
somewhere and be like,
happens.
"What the heck is this?" and
So many
then read
stories.
about it.
I have so
I'm a
many
little bit.
stories of people like that. And then also sometimes kids, like people in Tijuana, they'll put up a sign of saying, okay, we're going to hide in this block radius, this 10 block radius, just to make it more concentrated because there's only a small group of them, which was a really cool idea for them to do that. And and I never would think to do that. And then also sometimes little kids, they'll have the week before, they'll have parties where they make work and they'll hide it for each other so it's a little safer for them, if they're 8 years old or 9 years old in somebody's backyard. So there's a lot of stuff that doesn't happen on the map or on social media as well.
Right, but it's all part of the event. Now, you mentioned lots of different stories. Are there any kind of super memorable moments over the years, or maybe some like innovative mushroom themed art that you've seen? What are some of
Oh,
your favorite moments that you've experienced with
there's
this?
a ton. I mean, I end up in tears every year. I can't but be emotional. It's really, I even just talking about it gets me really worked up. I mean, I lose money on this thing every year, gladly, you know. Uh, but there's people. The Antarctica thing was pretty amazing. It was at the South Pole, like literally at the South Pole, and that was pretty cool.
That's
Um,
wild.
there's a video I have up on Instagram, and I hope this person's okay because it's like you could tell it came from a really true place. And she was talking about, she was just overwhelmed by the idea of how many people were actually playing. Like she had an idea that it was going to be fun, but she had no idea how people were going to be nuts. And I loved watching that video a bunch because she's just like amazed that this thing is the way it's become. And she didn't think it would be that way. And that makes me very happy. People, there's a town in Germany that decorated an old tree with mushrooms as part of this. They'll incorporate their own traditions into this. I knew very little about this stuff. I am not a mushroom expert. I don't know, death cap for cutie next to I don't know, Amarita, whatever, all that stuff. I try to remember the Latin words, Stighorn and all the really cool names and stuff do stick out with me, Anokis and all the whatever. But I am not an expert, and people will come up to me, they'll put interesting things in my pockets, and they'll be like, "Hey, this is for you," and I'm like, hey, I'm not, you should give it to a different person. But I am not an expert, but I'm always constantly amazed at people's passion behind this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the great thing about mushrooms is you don't need to know a lot about them to appreciate them. I mean, right? Even kids will just wander through the woods and they'll enjoy a mushroom because it looks cool, right? Or,
Yeah.
it's growing in a funny way or something like that. And you don't need to know the Latin name, or you don't need to know if you can eat it or not, or all these kind of things,
Yeah.
unless you're planning to eat it, which I don't
You
recommend.
should not eat
Exactly.
unless you are an expert. Yeah, do not eat. Yes, you don't want to be
Exactly.
bleeding from your eyeballs.
But have you found that you've learned more, like, are you learning more about mushrooms in general since you started this, or are you still very
I'm learning
focused on
more
the
about mushroom heads or shroom heads or people like that. I've also learned that I'm on my third Game of Shrooms Instagram account because of it was originally we'd call it shroom drop too. And
yeah.
so people would be like, "Oh, I'm dropping shrooms," and that was a bad idea, I guess, in hindsight. And for some reason, mushrooms, you could sell everything else in the world, all this awful tragedy and all this awful stuff. But, people say shroom drop, forget it. You'll be banned in 2 seconds, and then your account will never come back. So
Yeah.
that's happened twice. I'm on account number 3. And the thing is, I'm not selling anything. All I'm selling is really, honestly, like the golden age of what the promise of the internet was, which was bringing people together or sharing, like-minded folks in very niche interests, ways to coagulate and create something different and fun and subversive and surprising, but what you gonna do?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think I mean, the internet is very much meta, like the way mycelium grows through a forest. But exactly what you said, it's one of these ways that you can connect people who are interested in unique things, and you realize that, hey, this is actually a pretty big community. And I experienced that myself with mushrooms. Like when I was
Mm.
interested in mushrooms many, many years ago, I thought I was like the only guy, right? And then you start going through the Shroomery and all these other websites, and you're like, wow, like there's a lot of people that are actually interested in mushrooms, and it kind of takes on a life of its own. Then you form these cool communities. And what's the coolest thing is like what you're doing when the online community comes into real life and people are doing real things together all over the world. Super excited about this year's event, which takes place on Saturday, June 8th. Now, if someone wanted to participate this year, either as an artist or someone just heading out trying to find mushrooms, are
Mhm.
there any tips that you have for them so they can get the most out of this event?
Yeah, first, the game goes on no matter what. That's one thing. So if all the social media goes down and the map goes down, it's still a holiday. So, it's more of an idea than it is a gimmick, hopefully. So that the other thing is, if you can put your, sooner than later, get your participation pin on that map, because then people can, it'll link to your social media or wherever you want to post clues, however you want to do it. That's up to you. And so that way people come in your area can become aware. There's also little chapters of other Instagram accounts. Like there's one in Seattle, one in Tacoma, and one in Ireland, I think. And they'll repost things and clues for people in their specific areas,
Mm.
And they've reached out to me prior, which was really great. So we set it up. It's all the same. It has the same vibe. And the same kind of guidelines and things. And they point back to me, which is really great. And they do all this for nothing, which is wonderful. The other thing is to create actual artwork that means something to you. Spend some time on it. That's going to be the most effective way to do this, because you need to risk something of yourself and put it out there. It's scary, especially if you live in the suburbs or or in the rural suburb areas, and you think you might be the only one or a very few people playing. It feels a little scary sometimes. So, but I think give something of yourself, because then you'll get the best reward. The other thing is, sometimes I've probably hidden maybe 170 works so far. They not all, I would say maybe about 15-20% people, when they do find them, they don't contact you, and that's part of it. that happens. So I suggest making 2 or 3 pieces, and you'll have a better chance of having the right experience with this event. Um,
Okay.
and go with a friend, I guess, right? You need a guide sometimes.
Yeah.
Go with and yeah, I do a thing now is I started having meetups after, and I at one point I thought, oh, I'm gonna have this big party, we're gonna have entertainment, we're gonna do all this fun stuff, and then I realized everybody's so exhausted after getting up early, doing all this stuff. They just want to hang out, eat mushroom pizza, and talk to each other and share stories about the day.
Mhm.
And I had all this stuff planned, and I go, and people contact me all the time. They're like, okay, we're going to incorporate this thing. We're going to have a dance party. And I was like, well, one, I don't want anybody to pay for anything. Like, that's not it. That's against, to me, the spirit of the game. But the other thing is people just want to hang out and talk to each other and be like, look, I found your art, or I can't believe you hid this over here, or oh, I missed that one by 2 seconds. I totally knew you were going for the same one. Those
Right.
stories are really fascinating to watch. And sometimes I'll hide pieces and I'll just kind of stick around, or I'll go across the street, and watching people is, and lurking a little bit actually is really, really fun. I used to just like do it and run away. And now I just kind of hang out sometimes, and yeah. So it was last time I hid most of my mushrooms at the meetup. And at the end of the meetup, they didn't know, and it was under the tables. It was all over the place the whole night. There were the last 2 hours they've been in this one area, and all my stuff was hidden in this one area, in this backyard area of this pizza place. And they just all freaked out at the end. And so, that was because I was so exhausted, honestly, from the whole experience. Because I get pretty tired by trying to repost everybody and getting everything going by then. And
Yeah. I mean, is it a lot of like planning and putting together, like for you, anyways, is it a lot of work to put this event together? Again, is it something that just kind of happens on its own, or are you like you actively involved heavily leading up to the event?
Well, I try to get word out for people in, like I said, in areas that are less popular or less populated. But I have my friend Jason helps me with the map. So in case there's any technical difficulties, he set up that map. We did this before without a map at all, and
Oh,
that's fine. When people say I have problems with the map, I'm like, yeah, I have problems with it too. I do the best I can, but it shouldn't be defined. The game isn't doesn't hinge on this map totally.
so how did
Um,
you do it before the map? Was it
we just hid stuff. People let their people know, gave clues out, and that's just what happens. That's okay, because people have come to me and be like, oh, we can tag things and geotag. We can do this. We can put, IR, LR, QR, AI. They add all this crap to it, and I just go, yeah, no. The
yeah,
other thing, and businesses will contact me and like, oh, can I get this in here? We could do it. And I'm like, all right, but all the money has to go to a nonprofits organization. And that's what I've done with, I made a custom mushroom panel that'll meet people halfway, especially younger people. And all that, all my take on that goes to arts organizations.
okay,
And the other thing is, I refuse to let this thing make me upset or make it become a job. I just
right.
won't do it. I put it in a different basket. So whenever things get weird or people, I'm like, oh, why are they doing that? And I'm like, wait a minute, this is all supposed to be great and fun. So I have to catch myself every once in a while, but for the most part, everybody's been fantastic.
Well, that's
So
great. I mean, it's a super cool thing that you created, or you're the parent of, as you like to say. I just think
yeah.
it's a really great event. I love seeing it happen every single year. Before I let you go, though, is there any kind of future plans for Game of Shrooms, or are you just gonna kind of let this thing grow like a mushroom does, and see how it rolls?
Yeah, I mean, I'll see where it goes. I don't know. I like that it grows this way. If it
Right.
got super popular or it became, it goes on some TV shows and things like that. Sometimes it might. Some friends of mine came up with that Sanarchy thing that was like the bar crawl for Santa Claus people, and that was originally. I don't know if you've heard of that thing. It becomes this
No.
kind of. So, okay, so originally it was like a comment on commercialism and capitalism and Christmas gift buying and all that sort of stuff. And now it's become this kind of like frat boy raging party that go bar crawl kind of thing. So it totally went, and it's totally again, it's lost its way. I'm in no rush for this thing to go that way. I like that everybody word of mouth or word of shroom, this thing happens, and grows that way and builds upon itself in a really nice way, like a weird fractal. I imagine in my head like a fractal. There's like little spin-off things, and then but it all kind of comes back to the same thing. Everybody's been really respectful to it, as to the idea of it too. And when people approach me, I always ask them, "But have you played?" And they go, "Oh no, I haven't played. It's like a scavenger hunt." I was like, "No, how about you play this year, then come back and talk."
For sure. Yeah.
I'm in no rush. I'm in no rush for the rest of my life. Sure. This thing, no, it's gotta, it's gotta evolve, and hopefully, the help of my wife figuring it out, and like just try to testing out little phrases and little ways, like kind of guiding it to figure out, the spirit of it, like what makes it. Why is this thing special? Well, that's not just me. It's definitely a lot more special and different than I thought it would be.
Yeah, you put it out into this world, it's taken on a life of its own. And it's very much like growing mushrooms. If you try too hard, the mushrooms aren't going to grow as well. You just kind of got to let them do their thing. And instead of forcing it, you just kind of provide the right conditions for them to grow. To everybody out there watching this, if you want to learn more, you could head over to yumfactory.com/Game of Shrooms. I'll put the link in the description, or your Instagram account, Game of Shrooms Official. Is there anything else that people need to know to learn more about this event?
It's an at your own risk event.
Okay.
Okay. That's important. So, I was like, wait a minute, there's a lot of people playing. A lot of distracted people playing here. So everywhere it says at your own risk event.
Fair enough. So if you're if you're heading out there hiding art or looking for it, you're on your own out there.
Yeah. And please don't hide edibles or anything like that. I worry about pets. I worry about animals. I worry about all that sort of stuff. Keep it to art, if
Very
you could.
cool.
All right.
That's perfect. Well, Ada, thank you so much for joining us today on The Mushroom Show.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me.
I really hope you enjoyed that conversation. Again, I just think this is such a cool event and really helps spread worldwide interest in mushrooms in a very unique way. I have participated for a couple of years now, and I will say this event is getting more and more popular. So if you want to participate, you do need to have a game plan. You probably need to get out there early. I've had this experience where I've gone out twice now, and I don't know if I wasn't early enough, or maybe just somebody got up and got there before I did, but I got totally skunked. I didn't find anything, but it was still really fun to join in. Again, if you want to participate this year, either as an artist or as a mushroom art hunter, check out the official website, yumfactory.com/Game of Shrooms. Clear your calendar for Saturday, June 8th, 2024, and be sure to follow Game of Shrooms Official on Instagram to follow along with the fun. And that's it for this episode of The Mushroom Show. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. Again, if you like mushrooms, if you like The Mushroom Show, please do go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. It helps it get out to more people. And if you want to see future episodes of the show, make sure you go ahead and hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.